When Star Wars was released in 1977, it appeared on the surface to be a timeless fantasy set in space, full of knights, princesses, and battles between good and evil. Beneath that mythic exterior, however, the film draws deeply from real 20th century history, particularly the rise of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany during World War II. George Lucas did not invent the Galactic Empire in a vacuum. Instead, he built it using the visual language, political structures, and moral warnings associated with one of history's most infamous regimes. The empire's ideology, leadership, military organization, and relationship to its citizens echo the mechanisms by which Hitler and the Nazis consolidated power, maintained control, and pursued domination. In this way, Star Wars functions not only as entertainment, but as a cinematic reflection on how fascism emerges, seduces, and destroys. One of the clearest connections between Star Wars and Nazi Germany lies in the visual design of the Galactic Empire. Lucas and his collaborators intentionally borrowed from Nazi aesthetics to make the Empire immediately legible as evil to modern audiences. The Stormtroopers' name itself is taken directly from the German Sturmtruppen, elite shock troops used by the German army in World War I, and later mythologized by the Nazis. Their uniforms, with their stark white armor, anonymity, and uniformity, mirror the Nazi obsession with order, discipline, and the erasure of individuality. Imperial officers wear crisp gray or black uniforms closely resembling those of the SS, complete with rank insignia, high collars, and rigid posture. Darth Vader's helmet, while more stylized, evokes the silhouette of a Nazi Stahlhelm, blending technological menace with authoritarian symbolism. These visual choices are not accidental. Nazi Germany understood the power of aesthetics as a political weapon. Through uniforms, architecture, banners, and mass rallies, the regime created an image of overwhelming strength and inevitability. The Empire operates the same way. Its massive star destroyers blot out the sky, its troops march in perfect formation, and its symbols are omnipresent. The goal in both cases is psychological domination. By presenting power as total and unchallengeable, resistance appears futile. Star Wars translates this strategy into cinematic language, using scale and spectacle to convey the same intimidation that Nazi propaganda sought to instill. Beyond aesthetics, the political structure of the Empire closely parallels Hitler's rise to power. In the prequel trilogy, which retroactively clarifies the original films, Palpatine does not seize control through an outright coup. Instead, he is democratically elected as Chancellor during a time of crisis, exploiting fear, instability, and war to justify the expansion of executive power. This mirrors Hitler's own ascent in Weimar Germany. Hitler was appointed Chancellor through legal means and then used emergencies such as the Reichstag fire to suspend civil liberties, eliminate opposition, and transform a fragile democracy into a totalitarian dictatorship. In Star Wars, Palpatine engineers a galactic war to legitimize emergency powers, ultimately declaring himself emperor for a safe and secure society, language that echoes real-world authoritarian rhetoric. This aspect of Star Wars reflects Lucas's central warning. Fascism does not always arrive wearing the face of a monster. It often emerges gradually, cloaked in promises of security and stability. The citizens of the Republic, like those of Germany in the 1930s, accept the loss of freedom in exchange for order, only realizing too late what they have surrendered. The thunderous applause that greets Palpatine's declaration of empire is one of the most chilling moments in the saga precisely because it recalls the popular support that enabled Hitler's rule. Evil triumphs not only through violence, but through consent. The Empire's treatment of dissent and diversity further reinforces its connection to Nazi ideology. Nazi Germany was built on the idea of racial purity and the elimination of those deemed undesirable or subversive. While Star Wars does not replicate this ideology directly, the Empire consistently marginalizes, enslaves, or exterminates non-human species and rebellious populations. Alien races are largely absent from positions of power within the Empire, which is dominated almost entirely by humans, particularly white, male officers. This hierarchy subtly mirrors fascist notions of superiority and exclusion. The destruction of entire planets, most notably Alderaan, functions as a science fiction analog to the genocidal logic of the Nazis, collective punishment, dehumanization of the enemy, and the belief that annihilation is a legitimate tool of political control. The Death Star itself can be understood as an exaggerated symbol of Nazi military ambition. Nazi Germany pursued so-called wonder weapons, such as the V-2 rocket, believing that technological supremacy could compensate for strategic and moral failures. The Death Star represents this same obsession taken to an extreme, a single, ultimate weapon designed to cow the galaxy into submission. Like many of Hitler's grand military projects, it is enormous, costly, and ultimately ineffective, destroyed by a small, underestimated resistance. The message is clear. Authoritarian regimes often place blind faith in technological terror, yet underestimate the power of collective resistance and moral conviction. The Rebel Alliance, by contrast, draws heavily from real-world resistance movements that fought against Nazi occupation during World War II. They are decentralized, resource-poor, and dependent on secrecy, cooperation, and popular support. Their leaders are often former citizens, soldiers, or politicians who refuse to accept the legitimacy of the empire, much like the French resistance or other anti-fascist groups. The rebels' struggle is not merely military but ideological. They fight to restore a republic, civil liberties, and self-determination, directly opposing the authoritarian model embodied by the empire. In this moral framework, the Nazis serve as a historical shorthand for absolute tyranny, allowing Star Wars to communicate complex political ideas through familiar symbols. It is also significant that Lucas released Star Wars in the aftermath of the Vietnam War and during widespread distrust of government authority. While Nazi Germany is a primary influence on the empire's imagery and structure, Lucas has stated that the films are fundamentally about how democracies collapse into dictatorships. Hitler and the Nazis provided the most extreme and recognizable example of this process. By projecting those dynamics into a distant galaxy, Lucas made them accessible to a new generation, transforming historical trauma into myth. This mythic framing does not dilute the lesson, it amplifies it, reminding audiences that fascism is not confined to the past or to one nation. Ultimately, Star Wars uses Hitler and Nazi Germany as a moral and political reference point, rather than a literal blueprint. The Galactic Empire is not Nazi Germany in space, but it is deliberately constructed from the same components: charismatic authoritarian leadership, militarism, propaganda, dehumanization, and the erosion of democratic norms. These parallels allow the films to function as a cautionary tale, warning that the conditions which produced the Third Reich are not unique or extinct. By embedding these ideas within a popular space fantasy, Lucas ensured that the lessons of World War II would continue to resonate long after the historical details faded from public memory. In this sense, Star Wars is not merely inspired by Hitler and the Nazis, it is haunted by them. The Empire stands as a cinematic echo of one of humanity's darkest chapters, reminding audiences that evil often presents itself as order, strength, and destiny. The enduring power of Star Wars lies in its ability to translate that historical reality into a universal story, one that asks viewers to remain vigilant, skeptical of absolute power, and aware of how easily freedom can be lost when fear is allowed to rule.